Imagine a world lit only by oil lamps and firelight. In workshops hidden within ancient cities, masters bent over their creations, working with knowledge that had been passed down through generations. They knew secrets, how to make fire that could not be quenched, how to build machines that could predict the movements of the stars, how to forge steel so strong and beautiful that it seemed touched by magic. These secrets were precious, guarded carefully, shared only with trusted apprentices who would carry them forward into the future. But the future did not always cooperate. Wars came, empires fell. Masters died before they could teach their students, and slowly, quietly, the secrets slipped away. The formulas were forgotten. The techniques were lost. The knowledge that had taken centuries to develop vanished in a single generation. We like to believe that progress moves in one direction, always forward, always building on what came before. But history tells a different story. Some of the most remarkable achievements of the ancient world have been lost completely. We know they existed because we have the objects, the accounts, the evidence, but we cannot recreate them. Despite all our modern science and technology, there are things our ancestors could do that we cannot. Tonight, we will explore 3 such technologies: a fire that burned on water and terrified the enemies of an empire, a mechanical device so complex that nothing like it would be built again for over 1,000 years, and blades of such strength and beauty that they have become the stuff of legend. These are mysteries to wonder about as the night grows quiet, ancient secrets waiting to be imagined. We live in an age of information. Libraries contain millions of books. The internet holds more data than any single person could absorb in 1,000 lifetimes. We photograph, record, and document nearly everything. It seems impossible that anything truly important could ever be forgotten. Knowledge, we assume, only grows. Once something is discovered, it stays discovered. Once something is invented, it remains invented. The march of progress moves ever forward. But this assumption is wrong. History is filled with examples of knowledge that was gained and then lost, of skills that flourished and then faded, of technologies that worked brilliantly for centuries and then vanished as if they had never existed. The truth is that knowledge is far more fragile than we like to believe. It requires constant care, constant transmission, constant practice. When that chain of transmission is broken, even the most remarkable achievements can slip away into darkness. Consider how knowledge was preserved in the ancient world. There were no printing presses, no digital archives, no backup copies stored in distant servers. Knowledge existed in manuscripts copied by hand, each copy vulnerable to fire, flood, war, or simple neglect. Even more importantly, much knowledge existed not in writing at all, but in the minds and hands of skilled practitioners. A master craftsman might spend decades perfecting a technique, understanding through experience subtleties that could never be fully captured in words. When that master died, everything not passed to an apprentice died with him. The great catastrophes of history accelerated this loss. When the Library of Alexandria burned, not once, but multiple times over centuries, countless texts were destroyed forever. When Rome fell, the complex infrastructure that had supported its civilization crumbled. Aqueducts broke and were not repaired. Roads decayed. Skills that had been common became rare, then vanished entirely. The Mongol sack of Baghdad in 1258 destroyed one of the greatest centers of learning in the Islamic world. Scholars estimate that the Tigris River ran black with ink from all the books thrown into its waters. But catastrophe is not the only enemy of knowledge. Sometimes technologies fade simply because the world changes. A skill that was essential in one era becomes irrelevant in another. The craftsmen who practiced it find no students willing to learn. The materials they used become unavailable. The economic conditions that supported their work disappear. And gradually, without anyone noticing until it is too late, the knowledge slips away. Not all ancient technologies have been lost. We still know how to make bread, how to weave cloth, how to build with stone. Some techniques have been practiced continuously for thousands of years, passed from generation to generation without interruption. Why do some technologies survive while others vanish? Part of the answer lies in how widely a technology is practiced. Bread making survived because millions of people and thousands of communities knew how to do it. Even if one village was destroyed, others remained. The knowledge was distributed so widely that no single catastrophe could erase it. But a technology known only to a small group of specialists is vulnerable. If that group is destroyed by war, by plague, by economic disruption, the technology dies with them. Secrecy plays a complicated role. Many of the most remarkable ancient technologies were deliberately kept secret. Craftsmen guarded their methods to protect their livelihoods. Rulers classified military technologies to prevent enemies from copying them. Guilds restricted knowledge to members who had sworn oaths of silence. This secrecy was understandable, even rational, but it also made these technologies fragile. A secret known by only a few people can be lost if those few people die without sharing it. There is also a difference between knowledge that can be written down and knowledge that must be practiced. A recipe can be preserved in a book, but knowing the recipe is not the same as knowing how to cook. A skilled chef understands things that no recipe captures: how the dough should feel, how the oil should shimmer when the bread is ready by its smell and color. This kind of knowledge, sometimes called tacit knowledge, lives in the body as much as in the mind. It can only be transmitted through practice, through apprenticeship, through years of doing. When the chain of practice is broken, books alone cannot restore what is lost. Finally, some technologies vanish because they are no longer needed. The world changes, new materials become available, new methods prove more efficient. The old ways are abandoned not because they failed, but because something else succeeded. And once abandoned, they are quickly forgotten. Within a generation or two, no living person remembers how they worked. The three technologies we will explore tonight each represent a different kind of ancient achievement. One was a weapon of war. One was a scientific instrument. One was a craft of metallurgy. Yet all three share something remarkable. Despite the efforts of modern scientists, engineers, and historians, none has been fully recreated. We can come close. We can approximate, but we cannot match what the ancients achieved. The first technology is Greek fire. For over 700 years, the Byzantine Empire possessed a weapon that terrified its enemies. It was a liquid fire that could be sprayed from ships, burning fiercely even on water. Enemy fleets were devastated by it. Entire armies fled in terror at its approach. The formula was a state secret, known only to the emperor and a handful of trusted craftsmen. And when the Byzantine Empire finally fell, the secret fell with it. Today, we have only descriptions, rumors, and theories. The true formula for Greek fire has never been recovered. The second technology is the Antikythera Mechanism. In 1900, divers exploring an ancient shipwreck near the Greek island of Antikythera discovered something that should not have existed. It was a device made of bronze gears, corroded by centuries under the sea, but still recognizable as a machine of extraordinary complexity. When scientists finally understood what it was, they were astonished. The Antikythera Mechanism was an ancient computer, capable of predicting the positions of the sun, moon, and planets with remarkable accuracy. Nothing of comparable sophistication would be built in Europe for another 1,000 years. How the ancient Greeks achieved this level of precision remains a mystery, and why no similar devices survived is equally puzzling. The third technology is Damascus steel. For centuries, swordsmiths in the Middle East produced blades of legendary quality. These swords were strong enough to cut through inferior weapons, yet flexible enough to bend without breaking. Their surfaces displayed beautiful wavy patterns, like water frozen in metal. Warriors prized them above all other weapons. Crusaders brought stories of their power back to Europe, sparking centuries of fascination. But by the 18th century, the art of making true Damascus steel had been lost. Modern metallurgists have studied surviving blades, analyzed their composition, and attempted to recreate them. Some have come close. None have fully succeeded. What connects these three technologies is not their purpose or their origin. It is their incompleteness. In each case, we know something remarkable existed. We have evidence objects, accounts, scientific analysis. But we do not have the full picture, the formulas, the techniques, the subtle knowledge that made these technologies work have slipped beyond our reach. These gaps invite imagination. They remind us that the ancient world was not primitive or simple. Our ancestors were as intelligent as we are, and in some ways, they achieved things we still cannot match. Their secrets wait in the shadows of history, half revealed, half hidden. inviting us to wonder. Let us begin with a weapon that protected an empire for 7 centuries, a fire that burned upon the waves, and struck terror into the hearts of all who faced it. The empire that needed a miracle. In the year 330 CE, the Roman Emperor Constantine founded a new capital city on the shores of the Bosporus, the narrow strait that separates Europe from Asia. He named it Constantinople, and it would become one of the greatest cities the world has ever known. For over 1,000 years, Constantinople served as the heart of the Byzantine Empire, the eastern continuation of Rome that survived long after the western half had crumbled into ruin. The Byzantines did not call themselves Byzantines. That name was invented by later historians. They called themselves Romans, and they considered their empire to be the true heir of ancient Rome. Their capital was a marvel of the medieval world, a city of 500,000 people, protected by massive walls, adorned with churches and palaces, filled with treasures accumulated over centuries. The Hagia Sophia, with its enormous dome, was the largest cathedral in Christendom. The markets of Constantinople sold silk, spices, gold, and gems from every corner of the known world. Scholars preserved ancient Greek and Roman texts that would otherwise have been lost forever. But Constantinople's wealth made it a target. Throughout its long history, the Byzantine Empire faced enemies on every side. From the east came the Persians, ancient rivals who had fought Rome for centuries. From the south came the Arabs, united by the new faith of Islam and eager to expand their territory. From the north came waves of invaders, Slavs, Bulgars, Avars, and eventually the fearsome Vikings, whom the Byzantines called the Rus. From the west, in later centuries, would come the Crusaders, fellow Christians, who would prove as dangerous as any Muslim army. The empire survived through a combination of diplomacy, wealth, strong walls, and military innovation. Byzantine generals were famous for their cunning, preferring clever strategy to brute force. Byzantine engineers developed sophisticated siege weapons and defensive fortifications, and sometime in the 7th century, Byzantine craftsmen created a weapon so terrifying that it would protect the empire for 700 years, a weapon known to history as Greek fire. The exact origins of Greek fire are lost to history, but the traditional account places its invention in the year 672 CE. The empire was in crisis. A massive Arab fleet was approaching Constantinople, intent on capturing the great city and ending Byzantine power forever. The Arabs had already conquered Persia, Egypt, and much of the former Roman territory in the Middle East and North Africa. They seemed unstoppable. Constantinople's fall appeared inevitable. According to Byzantine chronicles, the empire was saved by a refugee named Kalanick, who had fled from the Arab-conquered city of Heliopolis in Syria. Kallinikos brought with him knowledge of a new weapon, a liquid fire that could be projected at enemy ships, burning so fiercely that water could not extinguish it. The Byzantines quickly equipped their warships with this new technology. When the Arab fleet arrived, they were met with something they had never seen before. Contemporary accounts describe the horror of the Arab sailors. Byzantine ships approached, and from bronze tubes mounted on their prows, streams of liquid fire erupted. The flames struck the Arab vessels and spread instantly. Men who leaped into the sea to escape found that the fire followed them, burning on the surface of the water. Some accounts claim it could even burn beneath the waves. Ships that had been the pride of the Arab navy became floating infernos. The attack was a catastrophe for the invaders. The siege lasted 4 years, from 674 to 678 CE. But the Arab fleet never recovered from that first devastating encounter with Greek fire. Eventually, the attackers withdrew, their navy shattered, their ambitions thwarted. Constantinople had been saved, and the weapon that saved it would become the most closely guarded secret in the Byzantine Empire. What exactly was Greek fire? This is the question that has puzzled historians and scientists for centuries. We have no surviving recipe, no complete technical description, no physical samples to analyze. All we have are accounts written by those who witnessed its effects or heard stories from those who had. The sources agree on certain characteristics. Greek fire was a liquid that burned with intense heat. It could be projected some distance, probably through bronze tubes mounted on ships. Once ignited, it was extremely difficult to extinguish. Water did not put it out. In fact, Some accounts suggest that water made it burn more fiercely. Sand might smother it. Vinegar was sometimes mentioned as a countermeasure, though its effectiveness is uncertain. The delivery system was as important as the substance itself. Byzantine warships were equipped with special devices, sometimes called siphons, that could spray the burning liquid at enemy vessels. These devices may have worked something like modern flamethrowers, using pressure to project the fire across the water. Some reconstructions suggest that bellows or pumps were used to create this pressure. Others propose that the liquid was heated before projection, causing it to shoot out under its own steam pressure. Greek fire was not only used at sea. Byzantine forces also employed it in land warfare, though less frequently. It could be thrown in pottery grenades, shot from catapults, or poured on attackers trying to scale walls. But its most famous and most devastating use was always naval. In an age of wooden ships and cloth sails, a fire that could not be extinguished was the ultimate weapon. The psychological impact may have been as important as the physical damage. Sailors who had never encountered Greek fire had no way to prepare for it, no way to understand it. To them, it must have seemed like something supernatural, a weapon from legend, a divine fire sent to punish them for their hubris. Fear spread through enemy fleets before a single shot was fired. The mere reputation of Greek fire deterred attacks that might otherwise have been launched. The Byzantines understood the value of what they possessed. Greek fire was not merely a weapon. It was a strategic advantage so significant that its loss could mean the end of the empire. Accordingly, the formula was protected with extraordinary care. Knowledge of Greek fire's composition was restricted to the emperor himself and a tiny circle of trusted craftsmen. These craftsmen were bound by oaths of secrecy and watched constantly for any sign of disloyalty. The penalty for revealing the secret was death, and not just for the betrayer, but potentially for their entire family. Foreign powers attempted repeatedly to learn the formula through bribery, espionage, and capture of Byzantine personnel. None succeeded. The Byzantines developed an almost religious attitude toward their secret weapon. Some emperors described Greek fire as a gift from God, revealed to Constantine the Great through divine intervention. Whether they believed this literally or used it as propaganda, the message was clear. The fire was sacred, and betraying its secret was not just treason but blasphemy. This secrecy was effective. For 7 centuries, no foreign power managed to duplicate Greek fire. Other nations developed their own incendiary weapons, but none matched the Byzantine original. The secret remained intact through palace coups, civil wars, and the constant turnover of emperors and officials. Somehow, across generations, the chain of transmission held. But chains can break, and eventually, this one did. The Byzantine Empire endured for over 1,000 years, but its final centuries were marked by decline and disaster. In 1204, the Fourth Crusade, supposedly launched to fight Muslims in the Holy Land, instead turned against Constantinople itself. Crusaders from Western Europe besieged and captured the city, looting its treasures, burning its libraries, and destroying much of what had made it great. The empire was shattered into fragments, and though Constantinople was eventually reclaimed, the damage was never fully repaired. During this period of chaos, the secret of Greek fire appears to have been disrupted. References to the weapon become less frequent after 1204. Some historians believe the knowledge was already fading before the Crusader attack, as the carefully guarded chain of transmission weakened. Others suggest that the sack of Constantinople killed key craftsmen or destroyed essential documents. Whatever the cause, by the late Byzantine period, Greek fire seems to have been more legend than reality. The final blow came in 1453, when the Ottoman Turks under Sultan Mehmed II captured Constantinople and brought the Byzantine Empire to an end. By then, Greek fire was already a memory. The Ottomans, despite their interest in military technology, found no formula to capture. The secret had died before the empire that created it. Today, we have only fragments. We have descriptions of effects. We have artistic depictions of bronze tubes spewing flames. We have theories based on what medieval chemists might have known: petroleum, quicklime, sulfur, saltpeter, resin. Scientists have attempted reconstructions, some quite impressive, but none can claim with certainty to have recreated the true Greek fire. The formula that protected Constantinople for 7 centuries remains unknown, while Byzantine craftsmen were perfecting their terrible fire. Centuries earlier and far to the west, Greek craftsmen of a different kind had created something equally remarkable. It was not a weapon of destruction, but a device of astonishing precision, a machine that could read the heavens and predict the movements of the stars. The year was 1900. A group of Greek sponge divers was sailing home from their work in the waters off North Africa when a storm forced them to take shelter near the small island of Antikythera, which lies between Crete and the Greek mainland. While waiting for the weather to clear, the divers decided to search the local waters for sponges. What they found instead would change our understanding of the ancient world. One diver descended to a depth of roughly 150 feet and discovered the remains of an ancient shipwreck. The site was littered with objects, bronze and marble statues, pottery, glassware, jewelry, and coins. The diver surfaced with a bronze arm from a statue, proof of the riches below. The Greek government quickly organized an official salvage operation, one of the first underwater archaeological expeditions in history. Over the following months, divers recovered an astonishing array of artifacts. Marble statues emerged from the sea, including a magnificent bronze figure now known as the Antikythera youth. Coins found at the site helped date the wreck to approximately 70 to 60 BCE. The ship had apparently been carrying Greek treasures, perhaps looted from conquered territories, toward Rome. Among the recovered objects was a lump of corroded bronze about the size of a shoebox. It was encrusted with sea growth and barely recognizable as anything man-made. At first, archaeologists set it aside, focusing their attention on the more obviously impressive finds. The lump was placed in storage at the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, where it sat largely ignored for months. Then the lump cracked open. As it dried, the corrosion split apart, revealing something no one had expected to find in a 2,000-year-old shipwreck. Inside the mass of corroded metal were gears, intricate, precisely cut bronze gears, meshed together in a complex arrangement. The lump was not a random piece of debris. It was a machine. For decades, scholars struggled to understand what the Antikythera Mechanism was and what it did. The corrosion was severe. Many pieces were missing. The gears were frozen in place, locked together by 2 millennia of oxidation. Early researchers recognized that it was some kind of astronomical device, but its full complexity was not appreciated until much later. The breakthrough came in the second half of the 20th century, when scientists began applying new imaging technologies to the mechanism. X-ray analysis revealed hidden gears that had not been visible on the surface. In the early 2000s, a team of researchers used advanced computed tomography, the same technology used in medical CT scans, to create 3-dimensional images of the mechanism's interior. For the first time, the full scope of the device became clear. The Antikythera Mechanism contained at least 30 precisely cut bronze gears, and possibly as many as 37 or more. These gears were arranged in a complex system that could be operated by turning a hand crank on the side of the device. When the crank was turned, the gears rotated at different speeds, driving a series of pointers and dials on the front and back faces of the mechanism. The front face displayed the position of the sun and moon in the sky, tracking their movements through the zodiac. It showed the phases of the moon with a small rotating ball, half silver and half black, that turned to display the correct lunar phase for any given date. It may also have tracked the positions of the 5 planets known to the ancient Greeks: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. Though this feature is still debated, the back face was equally impressive. It contained 2 spiral dials. One tracked the Metonic cycle, a 19-year pattern that describes the relationship between lunar months and solar years. The other tracked the Saros cycle, an 18-year pattern used to predict eclipses. By turning the crank to the appropriate date, a user could determine when the next solar or lunar eclipse would occur. There was even a small dial that may have tracked a cycle of the Panhellenic Games, including the famous Olympic Games, held every 4 years. The mechanism was not merely a calculator. It was a complete model of the Greek cosmos, a mechanical representation of how the heavens moved. The Antikythera Mechanism presents a profound puzzle. Its level of sophistication is far beyond anything else known from the ancient world. Nothing comparable would be built in Europe for over 1,000 years, until the great astronomical clocks of the medieval period. Even then, those clocks were the work of centuries of accumulated knowledge and refinement. The Antikythera Mechanism appears almost out of nowhere. The precision of the gears is remarkable. The teeth had to be cut with extreme accuracy to mesh properly and produce correct calculations. Some gears have over 200 teeth, each one precisely shaped and spaced. Manufacturing such components would be challenging even today without modern machine tools. How ancient craftsmen achieved this with hand tools and bronze working techniques remains unclear. The mechanism also implies a deep understanding of astronomy and mathematics. Whoever designed it knew the metonic cycle, the Saros cycle, the irregular motion of the moon, and the complex relationships between celestial bodies. This knowledge existed in the ancient Greek world. Astronomers like Hipparchus had developed sophisticated theories of celestial motion, but translating that knowledge into a working mechanical device required not just theoretical understanding but practical engineering skill of the highest order. Who built the Antikythera Mechanism? The most common theory connects it to the tradition of mechanical innovation associated with Archimedes, the famous mathematician and inventor who lived in Syracuse in the 3rd century BCE. Ancient sources mention that Archimedes built mechanical models of the heavens, devices that showed the movements of the sun, moon, and planets. None of these devices survive, but the Antikythera Mechanism may represent the same tradition of craftsmanship. Another theory points to the island of Rhodes, which was famous in antiquity for its mechanical wonders. The Colossus of Rhodes, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, was a massive bronze statue that demonstrated the island's skill in metalworking. Rhodian astronomers and craftsmen may have developed the techniques needed to build devices like the Antikythera Mechanism. Perhaps most intriguing is what the mechanism implies about ancient technology more generally. If the Greeks could build this, what else could they build? The Antikythera Mechanism is the only device of its kind to survive, but it is unlikely to have been unique. Such complex machines are not invented in isolation. They represent the culmination of a long tradition of experimentation and refinement. There must have been earlier, simpler devices. There may have been later, more sophisticated ones. All of them have vanished. How did the knowledge to build such devices disappear? The question is not easily answered, but several factors likely contributed. The ship carrying the Antikythera Mechanism sank around 70 to 60 BC during a period of great upheaval in the Mediterranean world. Rome was expanding aggressively, conquering the Greek kingdoms that had flourished since the time of Alexander the Great. The old centers of Greek learning were disrupted. Libraries were scattered. Scholars were displaced. The conditions that had nurtured innovation were breaking down. Bronze, the material from which the mechanism was made, is valuable and easily recycled. Ancient bronze objects were routinely melted down and recast into new items. Coins, weapons, tools, statues, anything made of bronze could be converted into something else. A complex astronomical device, once its owner died or its purpose was forgotten, might be worth more as raw metal than as a scientific instrument. Other mechanisms, like the Antikythera device, may have met this fate, melted down and transformed into everyday objects. The knowledge to build such devices also required sustained investment. Creating precision gears demanded specialized tools, trained craftsmen, and wealthy patrons willing to pay for work that had no immediate practical application. In times of war, economic disruption, or political instability, such luxuries become scarce. The chain of master and apprentice breaks. Skills that took generations to develop can be lost in a single lifetime. By the time the Roman Empire fell and Europe entered the medieval period, the tradition of Greek precision mechanics had been forgotten. Medieval Europeans knew that the ancients had been clever, but they had no idea just how clever. The Antikythera Mechanism lay on the seafloor, its gears locked in corrosion, waiting for divers who would not come for 2,000 years. Since the mechanism's true nature was recognized, researchers and craftsmen have attempted to build working replicas. These efforts have been remarkably successful, demonstrating that the device can indeed perform the functions ascribed to it. When the crank is turned, the gears rotate smoothly, and the pointers move to indicate the positions of celestial bodies with impressive accuracy. Building these replicas has also revealed the extraordinary difficulty of the original construction. Even with modern tools, creating gears of the necessary precision is challenging work. The craftsmen who made the original mechanism, working with hand tools and techniques, we can only guess at it, achieved something truly remarkable. Their skill commands respect across the millennia. New discoveries about the mechanism continue to emerge. Each improvement in imaging technology reveals new details, inscriptions previously unreadable, gears whose function was unknown, connections between components that had been overlooked. The mechanism still holds secrets. Perhaps the most important lesson of the Antikythera Mechanism is humility. We tend to assume that technology progresses in a straight line, that each generation builds on the achievements of the one before. The mechanism reminds us that progress can be lost, that peaks of achievement can be followed by valleys of forgetting. The ancient Greeks reached heights that would not be scaled again for 1,000 years, and most of what they built has been lost forever. While Greek craftsmen were calculating the movements of the heavens, far to the east, another tradition of craftsmanship was developing, one that would produce objects not of science, but of war. In the forges of India and the workshops of the Middle East, smiths were learning to create blades of legendary strength and beauty, weapons that would become known throughout the world as Damascus steel. Long before firearms transformed warfare, the sword was the supreme weapon. A warrior's blade was more than a tool. It was an extension of his arm, a symbol of his status, and sometimes the difference between life and death. Across the ancient world, smiths labored to create the perfect sword, one that would hold a sharp edge, withstand the shock of combat, and last a lifetime of use. Many succeeded in making good blades, but the smiths of the Middle East created something extraordinary. The swords known as Damascus steel became legendary throughout the medieval world. Crusaders returning from the Holy Land brought back tales of blades that could perform seemingly impossible feats. They spoke of swords that could slice through European weapons as if they were made of soft copper. They described edges so sharp they could cut a falling silk scarf in two as it drifted through the air. They marveled at blades that could be bent nearly double and spring back to perfect straightness without breaking or losing their edge. Most distinctive of all were the patterns. Damascus blades displayed swirling lines on their surfaces, flowing curves that resembled wood grain, running water, or windswept clouds. These patterns were not engraved or painted on. They were part of the steel itself, visible expressions of the blade's internal structure. No two Damascus blades were exactly alike. Each one bore a unique signature, as individual as a fingerprint. The name Damascus has caused some confusion over the centuries. The blades were not necessarily made in the city of Damascus, though that great Syrian trading center was certainly a market where they were bought and sold. The steel itself came from much farther away, from India and Sri Lanka, where craftsmen had learned to produce a special type of carbon steel known as wood. This raw material was shipped across the Indian Ocean and overland through Persia to the workshops of the Middle East, where skilled smiths transformed it into the legendary blades. Warriors throughout the Islamic world prized Damascus swords above all others. Sultans and caliphs commissioned blades of breathtaking beauty, their hilts studded with gems, their scabbards wrapped in precious metals. But even a plain Damascus blade, without any ornamentation, was a treasure. The steel itself was the true value. Strong, sharp, resilient, and marked with those mysterious flowing patterns that no European smith could reproduce. What made Damascus steel so special? For centuries, this question puzzled European observers who desperately wanted to duplicate the blades. They could see the results, the strength, the flexibility, the patterns, but they could not understand how these properties were achieved. Modern science has begun to unlock the secrets, though the full picture remains incomplete. The foundation of Damascus steel was woots, the crucible steel produced in India. Making woots was itself a sophisticated process. Smiths placed iron ore, charcoal, and various plant materials in small clay crucibles, sealed containers that could withstand extreme heat. These crucibles were heated in furnaces for days at a time, allowing the iron to absorb carbon from the charcoal. The result was a steel with very high carbon content, around 1.5% to 2%, compared to the 0.5% or less typical of European steels. High carbon content made the steel hard, which meant it could hold a sharp edge. But carbon also made steel brittle. A blade with too much carbon would shatter on impact, like glass. The genius of Damascus steel was that it somehow combined the hardness of heat-carbon steel with the flexibility of low-carbon iron. A Damascus blade could be sharpened to a razor edge, yet it would bend rather than break when stressed. Modern metallurgical analysis has revealed part of the secret. When scientists examined authentic Damascus blades under powerful microscopes, they found something unexpected. The steel contained microscopic structures called carbon nanotubes and cementite. These tiny formations, invisible to the naked eye, acted like reinforcing fibers within the metal. They gave the steel its remarkable combination of hardness and toughness. The distinctive patterns on the blade's surface were also a product of the steel's internal structure. Damascus steel contained bands of different compositions, some richer in carbon, some poorer. When the blade was etched with acid, these bands reacted differently, creating the visible pattern of light and dark lines. The pattern was not decoration added afterward. It was a window into the blade's very structure, proof that the metal had been properly forged. But knowing the composition of Damascus steel does not mean we can recreate it. The nanostructures that gave the blades their properties were not deliberately manufactured. The ancient smiths did not know about carbon nanotubes. These structures formed as a byproduct of the forging process, the result of specific conditions that the smiths had learned to create through centuries of trial and error. Understanding what the steel contains is not the same as understanding how to make it. The creation of a Damascus blade was as much an art as a science. The smith began with a cake of wootz steel, a small ingot that had been produced in India and shipped across thousands of miles. This ingot was precious, the product of days of careful smelting, irreplaceable if the forging went wrong. The smith's task was to transform this crude material into a weapon of beauty and power without ruining its special properties. The first challenge was temperature. If the steel was heated too hot, the carbon structures that gave it strength would be destroyed. If it was not heated enough, the metal would not be soft enough to work. The correct temperature had to be judged by eye, by the color of the glowing metal in the dim light of the forge. There were no thermometers, no scientific instruments. Only experience could teach a smith to recognize the precise shade of orange. That meant the steel was ready. Forging itself required thousands of hammer blows, each one carefully placed. The smith shaped the blade gradually, working the metal into the correct form while manipulating its internal structure. The direction and force of each blow affected how the carbon bands aligned within the steel. A skilled smith could control these alignments to some degree, creating patterns that flowed gracefully along the blade. The pattern was not merely beautiful, it was evidence that the forging had been done correctly. After the blade was shaped, it had to be hardened. This involved heating the steel again and then cooling it rapidly, usually by quenching it in water, oil, or some other liquid. The quenching process was critical. Done wrong, it could crack the blade or ruin its edge. Different smiths developed different quenching techniques, closely guarded secrets passed from master to apprentice. Some reportedly quenched their blades in special mixtures, the urine of goats fed only on ferns, according to one medieval account. Whether such exotic practices actually improved the steel or were merely superstition is unclear. The final steps involved polishing and etching. The blade was ground smooth and then treated with acid, which revealed the distinctive Damascus pattern. A skilled polisher could make the pattern stand out dramatically, the light and dark bands dancing across the curved surface of the blade. The completed weapon was a masterpiece of metallurgical art. Beautiful, deadly, and utterly beyond the ability of European smiths to duplicate. This entire process required years of training. A young man might spend a decade as an apprentice, learning the countless subtle judgments that meant the difference between success and failure. Even then, not every blade succeeded. The best smiths achieved perhaps one truly excellent blade for every several attempts. The knowledge was hard-won, accumulated over lifetimes, preserved in the hands and eyes of living craftsmen. By the 18th century, true Damascus steel had become a rarity. By the 19th century, it had ceased to exist altogether. The last smiths who knew how to make the legendary blades died without successors. The forges grew cold, the knowledge vanished. Why did this happen? Historians have proposed several explanations, and the truth probably involves some combination of all of them. One theory points to changes in the supply of raw materials. The wootz steel from India that served as the foundation of Damascus blades had specific properties derived from the ores used in its production. These ores contained trace elements, vanadium, molybdenum, and others, that contributed to the formation of the crucial nanostructures. If the sources of, or changed, or if the Indian smelting traditions were disrupted, the supply of proper woods might have dried up. Without the right raw material, even the most skilled smith could not produce true Damascus steel. Another theory emphasizes the disruption of trade routes. The production of Damascus blades depended on a complex supply chain stretching from India across the Middle East. Wars, political upheavals, and economic changes could all interfere with this chain. If woods became difficult to obtain, smiths might have been forced to use inferior substitutes. Over time, the tradition of working with true woods might have been lost simply because the material was no longer available. A third explanation focuses on changes in warfare. By the 18th century, firearms were becoming increasingly important on the battlefield. The cavalry charge, which had made the sword so crucial, was becoming obsolete. Wealthy patrons who once commissioned magnificent blades now spent their money on pistols and rifles. The demand for Damascus swords declined. Young men who might once have apprenticed themselves to master smiths chose other trades instead. The chain of transmission that had preserved the knowledge for centuries was broken. Whatever the precise causes, the result was the same. By the time European scientists became interested in understanding Damascus steel, no living person remembered how to make it. The smiths were gone. Their forges were cold. Only the blades themselves remained silent witnesses to a lost art. In the 2 centuries since the last Damascus blades were forged, many have attempted to recreate the lost technology. Metallurgists have analyzed surviving blades, identifying their chemical composition and microscopic structure. Craftsmen have experimented with historical techniques, trying to reproduce the conditions that once prevailed in Middle Eastern forges. Some have achieved impressive results. Modern pattern-welded steel, sometimes sold as Damascus steel, can produce blades with beautiful patterns. These are made by folding and welding together layers of different steels, creating a striped effect that superficially resembles ancient Damascus. But this is a different process that produces a different result. True Damascus patterns arose from the internal structure of a single piece of wood steel, not from the welding of multiple layers. Some researchers have come closer to the original by carefully selecting ores with the right trace elements, controlling temperatures with modern precision, and experimenting with historical forging techniques. They have produced blades with some of the properties of true Damascus steel. The patterns appear. The combination of hardness and flexibility approaches the legendary ideal, but even these researchers acknowledge that they have not fully succeeded. Something remains elusive, some subtle combination of materials and methods that the ancient smiths knew instinctively and that modern science has not yet recaptured. Perhaps we will eventually unlock the secret completely. Perhaps new analysis techniques will reveal what we are missing, and craftsmen will once again forge blades indistinguishable from those of the medieval masters. Or perhaps some mysteries are meant to endure. Reminders that our ancestors achieved things we cannot easily match. That knowledge can be lost as well as found, that the past holds wonders we may never fully understand. The blades that survive, scattered in museums and private collections around the world, still gleam with their ancient patterns. They are messengers from a vanished world, carrying secrets in their steel that they will not easily surrender. For centuries, historians and scientists have attempted to identify the ingredients of Greek fire. The Byzantines left no recipe, but they did leave descriptions. And from these descriptions, researchers have constructed theories about what the weapon might have been. The most widely accepted theory holds that Greek fire was based on petroleum crude oil, or one of its natural derivatives. The Byzantine Empire controlled territory near the Black Sea and in the Caucasus region, where petroleum seeped naturally to the surface. Ancient peoples knew about this substance, which they called naphtha. It burned readily and was already used in various incendiary applications. A refined or processed form of naphtha could have served as the foundation of Greek fire, but petroleum alone does not explain all the reported properties of the weapon. Ordinary petroleum does not burn on water with the intensity described in historical accounts. Something must have been added to make it more potent. Researchers have proposed various additives. Quickite, a calcium oxide compound that reacts violently with water and generates intense heat. Sulfur, which burns with a characteristic smell mentioned in some accounts. Pine resin, which would have made the mixture sticky and harder to remove from surfaces. And saltpeter, an oxidizing agent that could intensify the flames. Modern experimenters have created mixtures based on these theories, and some have produced impressive results. Flames that float on water, that resist extinguishing, that can be projected through tubes using pressure. All of these have been demonstrated in controlled conditions, yet no one can claim with certainty to have recreated the true Greek fire. The historical descriptions may have been exaggerated, the actual weapon may have varied over the centuries, and certain crucial details of preparation and delivery may have been lost beyond recovery. Some researchers have suggested that Greek fire was not a single formula, but a family of related weapons, improved and modified over the 7 centuries of its use. Early versions may have been simpler, with later versions incorporating refinements discovered through experimentation. That may never have been one secret to lose, but rather a tradition of knowledge that eroded gradually as the empire declined. The delivery system remains equally mysterious. The bronze tubes, or siphons, that projected the fire must have been sophisticated devices. They needed to handle a flammable liquid under pressure without leaking or exploding. They needed to project that liquid with enough force to reach enemy ships. They needed to ignite the liquid reliably at the moment of projection. Medieval engineers capable of building such devices would have been rare and valuable. Their skills may have been as important as the formula itself, and equally vulnerable to loss. What we can say with confidence is that Greek fire was real, that it was devastatingly effective, and that its secret was successfully protected for an extraordinarily long time. Beyond that, we are left with educated guesses. The flames that once terrified the enemies of Byzantium have faded into history, leaving only questions behind. The Antikythera Mechanism poses a different kind of puzzle. We have the device itself, corroded and fragmentary, but real. We can study its gears, measure its dimensions, and trace the inscriptions carved into its surfaces. Modern imaging technology has revealed details invisible to earlier research, and yet fundamental questions remain. The most debated question is one of origins. Who designed and built the mechanism? The device was found in a shipwreck, but that tells us only where it ended up, not where it came from. The ship appears to have been sailing from the eastern Mediterranean toward Rome, possibly carrying looted Greek treasures. The mechanism could have been made almost anywhere in the Greek world. The connection to Archimedes remains tantalizing, but unproven. Ancient sources describe mechanical devices built by Archimedes, including models of the heavens that showed the movements of celestial bodies. Cicero, the Roman orator, claimed to have seen one of these devices, brought to Rome after the conquest of Syracuse in 212 BCE. If the Antikythera mechanism represents the same tradition, it would link the device to one of the greatest scientific minds of antiquity. But we have no direct evidence connecting the mechanism to Archimedes or his workshop. The island of Rhodes is another candidate. Rhodes was famous for its mechanical wonders, and Rhodian astronomers made significant contributions to the understanding of celestial motion. The astronomer, Hipparchus, who worked on Rhodes in the 2nd century BC, developed theories of lunar motion that appeared to be incorporated into the mechanism. The level of astronomical sophistication required to design the device was certainly present on Rhodes. Perhaps most intriguing are the questions the mechanism raises about ancient technology in general. The Antikythera mechanism is unique. No other device of comparable complexity has survived from antiquity, but it is unlikely to have been the only one ever made. Such sophisticated machines do not appear from nothing. They represent the culmination of a long tradition of experimentation, of simpler devices refined over generations until they reach this level of precision. Where are those other devices? The most likely answer is that they were recycled. Bronze was valuable. When a complex astronomical device broke, or when its owner died and no one understood how to use it, the sensible thing was to melt it down. The bronze could be recast into coins, tools, or weapons, items of obvious practical value. Only by accident did the Antikythera mechanism escape this fate, preserved by the shipwreck that should have destroyed it. This realization has profound implications. If one such device survived by accident, how many others existed that did not survive? The ancient Greek world may have been far more technologically sophisticated than the surviving evidence suggests. We may be seeing only the faintest shadow of what once existed. A single piece of a puzzle, whose other pieces have been melted down and scattered to the winds. Damascus steel has been subjected to intense scientific scrutiny, and researchers have learned a great deal about what made these blades special. Yet the gap between understanding and reproduction remains frustratingly wide. The carbon nanostructures found in authentic Damascus blades are now well documented. These microscopic tubes and wires of carbon, distributed throughout the steel, gave the metal its unusual properties. They acted as reinforcing fibers, preventing cracks from spreading and allowing the blade to flex without breaking. They also contributed to the distinctive patterns, creating the bands of different composition that became visible when the surface was etched. But how did these structures form? The ancient smiths did not know about nanotechnology. They could not have deliberately created carbon nano. The structures must have arisen spontaneously, as a byproduct of the forging process. Something about the combination of materials, temperatures, and techniques caused the carbon in the steel to organize itself into these beneficial forms. Research suggests that trace elements in the original Indian ore played a crucial role. Wood steel made from ores containing small amounts of vanadium, molybdenum, and other elements developed the nanostructures more readily than steel made from pure ores. These trace elements acted as catalysts, encouraging the carbon to form tubes and wires rather than remaining randomly distributed. If the composition of available ores changed, or if smiths switched to ores from different sources, the magical properties of Damascus steel would have vanished even if the smiths continued using the same techniques. Temperature control was equally critical. The nanostructures could only form within a narrow range of temperatures. Too hot, and they would dissolve back into the surrounding metal. Too cold, and they would not form at all. The ancient smiths had to maintain the correct temperature through feel and experience, judging by the color of the glowing metal. This was tacit knowledge of the most demanding kind, knowledge that could not be written down, only learned through years of practice. Modern attempts at recreation have achieved partial success by carefully selecting ores with appropriate trace elements and controlling temperatures with scientific precision. Some researchers have produced blades with properties approaching those of historical Damascus steel. The patterns appear. The combination of hardness and flexibility improves. But even these researchers acknowledge that they have not fully replicated the original. Something remains elusive. Some combination of factors that the ancient smiths achieved through intuition and that modern metallurgists have not yet identified. These three technologies, the fire, the mechanism, the steel, were lost through different circumstances. Greek fire was deliberately kept secret and died when its keepers died. The Antikythera Mechanism and its tradition vanished amid the upheavals that transformed the ancient Mediterranean. Damascus steel faded when its supply chains broke and its practitioners found no successors. Yet certain common patterns emerged from their stories. First, all three technologies depended on knowledge that was difficult to transmit. Written instructions could preserve recipes and diagrams, but they could not capture the subtle judgments that separated success from failure. How hot should the forge be? How long should the mixture simmer? How precisely must the gears be cut? These questions could only be answered through experience, through years of practice under the guidance of a master. When the chain of masters and apprentices broke, no book could restore what was lost. Second, all three technologies existed in contexts of deliberate secrecy or limited distribution. Greek fire was a state secret. The Antikythera Mechanism represented specialized knowledge held by a small community of scholars and craftsmen. Damascus steel was the province of guild traditions that restricted entry and guarded their methods. Secrecy protected these technologies from competitors, but also made them fragile. Widely distributed knowledge can survive catastrophe. Narrowly held knowledge cannot. Third, all three technologies became obsolete or irrelevant before they vanished. Greek fire lost its importance as the Byzantine navy declined. The tradition of precision mechanics, represented by the Antikythera Mechanism, had no practical application that would ensure its preservation. Damascus steel could not compete with firearms. On the modern battlefield, when technologies cease to matter, the incentive to preserve them disappears. Skills that once commanded respect and compensation become curiosities, then memories, then nothing. These patterns offer warnings for our own time. We too possess knowledge that is difficult to transmit, narrowly held, and potentially vulnerable to the lost technologies of the ancient world remind us that progress is not inevitable, that knowledge requires constant effort to maintain, and that even the most remarkable achievements can slip away if we are not careful to preserve them. Behind every technology, no matter how remarkable, There are human beings, not abstractions, not legends, but real people with hands that grew calloused from work, eyes that strained in dim light, and minds that puzzled over problems until solutions emerged. When we contemplate lost technologies, we are really contemplating lost people. The inventors, the craftsmen, the apprentices who carried knowledge forward until one day there was no one left to carry it. Imagine the forge where Damascus blades were made. Picture the smith standing before the glowing coals, his face lit by the orange heat, his hammer rising and falling in rhythms learned over decades. He cannot explain exactly why he strikes at this angle rather than that one, why he waits 3 heartbeats before the next blow instead of 2. The knowledge lives in his muscles, in his instincts, in a part of his mind that words cannot reach. He learned it from his master, who learned it from another master, back through generations to some forgotten innovator, who first discovered that steel could be made to sing. Imagine the workshop where the Antikythera Mechanism was built. A craftsman bends over a piece of bronze, cutting teeth into a gear with tools that seem impossibly crude for such delicate work. He has made hundreds of gears before this one. He knows exactly how the metal behaves, how much pressure to apply, how to correct for the tiny imperfections that would throw the mechanism's calculatance off. Somewhere in the room, perhaps an astronomer is explaining the celestial cycles that the machine must model. The conversation between them, between theoretical knowledge and practical skill, produces something neither could create alone. Imagine the Byzantine workshop where Greek fire was prepared. The secrecy is oppressive. The workers know that revealing what they do here could mean death, not only for themselves but for their families. Yet they take pride in their work. They are protecting the empire, wielding a power that has kept Constantinople safe for generations. The formula is more than a recipe. It is a sacred trust, passed from emperor to emperor, from craftsman to craftsman, for centuries. These people had names. They had families, hopes, fears, ordinary lives outside their extraordinary work. Most of their names are lost to us now. We know what they made, but we do not know who they were. They have become anonymous, merged into the objects they created. And yet, without them, there would be nothing to wonder about. The technologies we admire were not made by history. They were made by human hands. We tend to think of history as a story of progress. Each generation learns from the previous one, builds on its achievements, and reaches new heights. The arrow of time points upward, from primitive beginnings toward ever greater sophistication. We are the culmination of this process, the most advanced humans who have ever lived. Lost technologies challenge this comfortable narrative. They remind us that the arrow can point backward as well as forward. Knowledge can be forgotten. Skills can disappear. Achievements that took centuries to develop can vanish in a generation. The line of progress is not straight. It curves. It doubles back. It sometimes breaks entirely. The people who built the Antikythera Mechanism lived over 2,000 years ago, yet they achieved precision engineering that would not be matched again for a millennium. The smiths who forged Damascus steel created nanostructures that modern metallurgists struggle to replicate. The Byzantines who wielded Greek fire possessed a weapon that the greatest military powers of their age could not copy. In these specific areas, our ancestors surpassed not only their contemporaries, but their descendants as well. This is a humbling realization. We are accustomed to looking down on the past, viewing earlier civilizations as stepping stones on the way to our own greatness. Lost technologies invite us to look up instead, to recognize that the people who came before us were not simpler or less intelligent, that they faced their own challenges with their own forms of genius, and that some of their achievements remain beyond our reach. History is not a ladder, climbing steadily upward. It is more like a landscape of peaks and valleys, with different civilizations reaching different heights in different areas at different times. Some peaks have never been climbed again. Some knowledge, once lost, has stayed lost despite all our efforts to recover it. The past is not merely prologue. It is a foreign country, full of wonders we do not fully understand. There's something appealing about mysteries that remain unsolved. A question with a definitive answer is satisfying, but it is also closed. Once we know, we stop wondering. The curiosity that drew us to the question moves on to other things, but a mystery that endures keeps us engaged, keeps us returning, keeps the wonder alive. The lost technologies we have explored tonight are beautiful precisely because they are incomplete. We know enough to be astonished, but not enough to be satisfied. We can marvel at the patterns in Damascus steel without fully understanding how they were made. We can admire the precision of the Antikythera Mechanism without knowing exactly who built it or why. We can imagine the terror of Greek fire without being certain what it actually was. This incompleteness is not a failure. It is an invitation. These mysteries invite us to imagine, to speculate, to dream. They open doors into the past that we can walk through in our minds, exploring workshops and forges and laboratories that no longer exist except in our imagination. The unknown becomes a canvas on which we can paint whatever pictures move us. There is also comfort in knowing that some things remain beyond our grasp. We live in an age that often seems to have explained everything, catalogued everything, left no room for wonder. Lost technologies remind us that the world is still full of secrets. Not everything has been figured out. Not everything can be Googled. Some questions remain open, waiting for answers that may never come. And that is not a tragedy, but a gift. When we contemplate lost technologies, we are also contemplating our own responsibilities. We are the inheritors of knowledge accumulated over thousands of years. Skills and discoveries passed from generation to generation have made possible everything we take for granted. We owe an enormous debt to the past. Part of that debt is gratitude. We benefit daily from the work of countless people we will never know, whose names have been forgotten, whose contributions have been absorbed into the fabric of our lives. The food we eat, the clothes we wear, the buildings we inhabit, the devices we use, all of these represent knowledge, preserved and transmitted across centuries. We are surrounded by gifts from the past. But gratitude is not enough. We also have a responsibility to preserve what we have received and pass it on to those who come after us. Lost technologies remind us how easily this transmission can fail. Knowledge that seems permanent can vanish within a lifetime. Skills that seem essential can become obsolete and forgotten. If we are not careful, we too will lose things that should have been preserved. This responsibility extends beyond technology. It encompasses all forms of knowledge: art, music, literature, history, philosophy, the accumulated wisdom of human experience. Each generation must choose what to keep and what to let go. The choices we make will determine what future generations inherit. The lost technologies of the ancient world warn us that these choices have consequences, that carelessness has costs, that once something is lost, it may never be recovered. As the night grows quiet and your thoughts begin to soften, let these ancient mysteries accompany you. There is no need to solve them tonight. They have waited for centuries. They can wait a little longer. Instead, let your imagination wander. Picture the glow of a Byzantine forge, the flames leaping impossibly on the surface of the sea. Imagine the soft clicking of bronze gears, calculating the movements of stars that still shine above us. Feel the weight of a Damascus blade in your hand, its surface rippling with patterns like frozen water. These are not just facts from history books. They are doorways into wonder. Walk through them gently. Let them carry you toward rest. We have journeyed far tonight, through centuries and across continents, following the traces of knowledge that once existed and then faded into silence. 3 technologies, each remarkable in its own way, each lost to us, despite all our efforts to recover them. Greek fire burned across the waters of the Mediterranean for 700 years. It protected Constantinople when nothing else could, turning back fleets that would have overwhelmed any ordinary defense. Emperors guarded its secret as a sacred trust, passing it from generation to generation until one day there was no one left to pass it to. The flames that once terrified the enemies of Byzantium guttered out, leaving only stories and questions behind. Somewhere in the ashes of that vanished empire, the formula still hides, or perhaps it is gone forever, dissolved into the smoke of history. The Antikythera Mechanism lay beneath the sea for 2,000 years. Its bronze gears, frozen by corrosion. Its purpose, forgotten by the world above. When divers finally brought it to the surface, no one understood what they had found. Only slowly, over decades of patient study, did the truth emerge that the ancient Greeks had built a computer, a machine of breathtaking precision that could model the heavens themselves. We can build replicas now. We can trace the outlines of how it worked, but we cannot fully explain how craftsmen with hand tools achieved what they achieved, or why no similar devices survived. Damascus steel gleams in museum cases around the world, its surface still rippling with patterns that no modern smith can perfectly reproduce. For centuries, these blades represented the pinnacle of the metalworker's art, strong, sharp, beautiful, and seemingly touched by magic. Warriors treasured them. Kingdoms coveted them. And then, quietly, the knowledge slipped away. The last mastersmiths died. The forges cooled. The secret of how to make carbon dance within steel was lost to the ages. Each of these technologies represents a peak of human achievement in its field. Each one was real, documented, admired by contemporaries who understood its value, and each one is now beyond our reach. A gift from the past that we can admire but cannot fully unwrap. When a technology is lost, what remains? Sometimes, nothing. The knowledge simply vanishes, leaving no trace. But sometimes, pieces survive, objects, accounts, fragments that hint at what once existed. The Antikythera Mechanism itself is a survivor, corroded, incomplete, but real. A physical artifact we can hold in our hands and study with our instruments. Its gears still carry the marks of the craftsman who cut them. Its inscriptions still bear the words of the astronomer who designed it. It is a messenger from a lost world, speaking to us in a language we are slowly learning to understand. Damascus blades are survivors too. Thousands of them still exist, scattered in collections across the globe. We can examine them, analyze them, run our most sophisticated tests on their steel. They do not give up their secrets easily, but they give up enough to tantalize us, to suggest that understanding might be possible if only we knew where to look. Greek fire left fewer traces. No samples of the substance survive. No equipment has been found. We have only words, descriptions written by those who witnessed its effects, rumors passed down through centuries. From these fragments, we try to reconstruct what the weapon might have been, but words can only capture so much. The reality of Greek fire, its smell, its heat, its terrible beauty, is beyond our recovery. These remnants are precious. They are our only connection to achievements that otherwise would be entirely forgotten. They remind us that the past was real, that the people who lived in it were as clever and capable as we are. That history is not merely a story we tell, but a place where wonders were made and lost. These mysteries are not puzzles to be solved tonight. They have waited for centuries. They will wait for centuries more. There is no urgency, no need to find answers before you sleep. Instead, let them rest beside you, gentle companions for the quiet hours. Let your mind wander through ancient workshops. Imagine the warmth of a forge where steel is being born, the soft glow of molten metal, the rhythmic ring of hammer on anvil. Picture a Greek craftsman bent over a piece of bronze, cutting gears with patient precision, knowing that each tooth must be perfect. See the Byzantine ships with their bronze siphons, the flames leaping across the waves, the enemy fleet scattering in terror. These images are gifts. They cost nothing. They demand nothing. They ask only that you wonder, that you imagine, that you let your mind drift into a past that is gone but not entirely forgotten. There is no need to understand everything. There is no need to solve every mystery. Some questions are best left open, their answers hidden in the shadows, where they have always been. The not knowing is part of the beauty. It leaves room for dreams. The people who made these things are gone. Their names, for the most part, have been forgotten. Their workshops have crumbled into dust. The empires they served have fallen. The world they knew has vanished so completely that we can barely imagine it. And yet, their achievements remain. Not fully, not completely, but enough to remind us that they existed. The gears still turn in our reconstructions. The blades still gleam in their cases. The flames still burn in our imaginations. Across the gulf of centuries, something reaches out to us. A whisper of ingenuity, a trace of genius, a shadow of hands that once knew secrets we have forgotten. Perhaps, as you drift toward sleep, you will find yourself walking among them. In that quiet space between waking and dreaming, the forges may still glow, the gears may still click, the flames may still dance upon the water. The ancient craftsmen may still work at their benches, patient and skilled, creating wonders that will outlast empires. They cannot speak to us, but their creations speak for them. And if we listen carefully, in the stillness of the night, we can almost hear what they are saying. Sleep well, let the mysteries keep you company, and may your dreams be filled with the wonders of the past. Thank you for spending this time wandering through the mysteries of the ancient world. Together, we have stood before forges and workshops long turned to dust, imagining the hands that once created wonders we can no longer fully understand. Greek fire, burning impossibly upon the waves, the Antikythera Mechanism, calculating the dance of the stars, Damascus steel, its patterns flowing like frozen rivers through metal. These technologies waited centuries to be rediscovered. Perhaps they are waiting still for the researcher who will finally unlock their secrets. Or for dreamers like you who keep their memory alive. We would love to hear your thoughts. Which of these lost technologies fascinates you most? Are there other ancient mysteries you wish we had explored? Share your reflections in the comments below. History belongs to all who wonder about it, and your curiosity adds to the conversation. If these stories brought you peace, consider sharing them with someone who might enjoy a quiet journey through time. And if you wish to explore more forgotten corners of the past, we hope you will return. May your dreams be filled with ancient wonders, and may the mysteries of the past rest gently with you tonight. Good night.